Everybody's running around just shouting the F word, okay? It's getting a little overused this week. I get it. I know it's a hot topic, but we've got to stop just talking about the Fed all the time, okay? Look, I had a friend call me yesterday. He doesn't pay attention to any of this money stuff or any of that, but he was at the dentist and they had, I guess, like CNBC on the background or something. He's like, dude, everybody's talking about the Fed this, the Fed that. What is the Fed? And more importantly, what does it mean for me? And he goes, can you explain this to me like I'm 10? And I said, yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and do this. So for those of you who aren't really familiar with how the government works, what the Federal Reserve does, and all these other things, and really just why it matters to you, this isn't going to be a big, civic study or anything like that. I'm just going to break down really quickly what the Fed does and then why it has a big impact on your life and every other American, and honestly, international implications too, because so many other countries use the dollar in one way or the other. So let's talk about how this affects you and what you need to be paying attention to in the coming months, because this is kind of a big deal. All right. So if you think of the Fed, that's short for the Federal Reserve. This is a branch of government that if you ever listen to the musical Hamilton, they actually talk about the Fed a lot. And this was one of the genius things that Hamilton was actually a part of, because what they did is they took the people who were responsible for like currency and the money, and they gave them their own department that is totally separate from the president or Congress or the House or any of those. So the president and Congress do not have any control over the Fed. Hypothetically speaking, they're supposed to be totally non-biased, not politically connected, anything like that. We know that there's some shoulder rubbing and they're involved, but for the most part, the president cannot come in, or Congress or anybody, and say like, hey, we're going to do this with our currency. We're going to print more money or whatever. It has to come from the Fed. So anyway, so imagine the Fed is just the big boss of all the dollars that ever get created. And one of the most important decisions that they can make comes around rate increases, or, in different things like that. Now, what is a rate increase? Really simply, whenever you're looking to buy a home, get a credit card, anything that has to do with interest, if you're getting a car loan, all of that is based off of what the Fed is saying the interest rates are. Because what banks and all of these other, companies are doing is they are borrowing money from the government, and the government is saying, just like anything else, that if you're going to borrow money from me, it's going to cost you. And that's one of the ways that, the Fed makes money for the country. So if they come and they say, hey, you're going to borrow money from me for 2%, well, then that means that for the banks to make money, they have to loan it out for 8%. That way they make a 5% profit and they can continue to operate. Well, if the Fed comes in and says, okay, well, instead of doing it at 3%, we're going to take it down to 2%. Well, now that means that the money is cheaper for banks and other companies to come in and be able to borrow money from the government. So what this does is, there's, like anything else, good and bad. The first thing is you get cheaper loans. So when the Fed is taking these things down, because companies don't have to borrow as much. Right now, things are really high. A lot of people are not buying homes because you're seeing interest rates in the 6, 7, even 8%, some higher if you don't have good credit. And that's just a ton of money to have to borrow on something like a home that you just have to pay to the bank. That's money lost, right? So a lot of people, because of that, they're just not buying homes, and it's kind of freezing the market. And that's generally how it works with cars and other things too. But cheaper loans are obviously good. So if they drop it, it will make the loans cheaper, which means more people will buy cars, more people will buy houses. All right. The other big thing, and this goes into what I was just saying, is more spending. So when it's cheaper to borrow money, people are more likely to actually borrow it. And what happens when people borrow it? We spend it, which is the point of money. So that stimulates the economy, normally helps like, Target and Walmart and all the big stores and stocks, to be able to go up. So generally, that's kind of what they're hoping is going to happen. So for the most part, all of that sounds really good, right? But here's the catch. If the Fed is coming in and they feel like they need to drop the interest rates, The reason that they're doing that is because they need people to go out and be spending more money. Why is that? They need to stimulate the economy. So inherently, if you are doing a rate cut like this, it's because they think the economy is in a bad place. And generally speaking, the economy is in a pretty bad place right now. So that's one of the catch-22s of this, is that, yes, it's a good thing in the short term, potentially the long term. It depends on how it all plays out, but there's some downsides too. So some of the other downsides is the fact that, well, if the economy is in a bad place, we've seen, tons of layoffs in different industries by the thousands, and all of those people who have been laid off for the past 5, 6, 7 months, well, they could go into even more debt because now there may be things that they need to buy or that they wanted to get. And that can cause really bad spending habits, which is something that we see. Credit card debt is at an all-time high. And guess what? Credit card interest rates are also at an all-time high. So it's a double whammy as far as consumer debt goes. The other thing is that this can actually make prices go up. Now, I know that sounds a little weird. It's like, well, Stephen, didn't you just say that when the Fed cuts, don't things go down? Borrowing goes down. So let me give you an example. If I'm selling my home, and let's say I'm selling my home for $500,000, and I know that right now the market is really slow. I'm not getting a lot of offers. People don't want to borrow money at 6 and 7%. It just feels a lot to pay the banks and different things like that. Okay, well then, I'm going to list it at $5,000 or $500,000 and leave it there. But then if all of a sudden the Fed drops it, and now because the banks can borrow money from the government cheaper, they drop the rate. So now it's 5% rates again. Well, now all of a sudden, all these people who wanted to buy a home but didn't want to pay that much in interest are going to come out of the woodwork and be like, oh, hey, yeah, we'll take your $500,000 house. And now all of a sudden I went from 0 offers to 10 offers. Well, what happens if I'm getting a ton of offers? I'm going to say, hey, whoever makes me the best offer gets the house. There's going to be competition. I am going to raise the price. And then that's what ends up happening. And that's why, just a couple years ago when we had 3% interest rates and, sometimes even 2%, and they were at an all-time low, borrowing was as cheap as it'll ever get. So people were going out and just making these crazy offers. I mean, you had lines to get into an open house. It was insanity because borrowing money was so cheap, right? And we know that money devalues over time because of inflation. We'll get too much into that, but that's something that has to go, in that we have to consider here. So that's why this can actually cause things to have prices go up, is because now people feel like they have more spending power. So because they want to go spend, companies will then raise their prices back up, or individuals will on their cars or homes or whatever the case may be. So the other thing that can really impact people, and it's going to impact a lot of people, is in their savings accounts. So I am a huge proponent of HISAs, a high yield savings account. I use one right now. I get 4.25%. So that means for every $1,000 that you have in a HISA, they're giving you $40.25 every single month for that. Well, that's pretty awesome when you consider a regular checking account pretty much gives you no interest. All right. So last year, I think with everything I had in there, I got over $4,000 by just putting my savings account in this, because the bank is paying me to hold their cash there so they can go use it. And for me, it's just a savings account. I'm not going to spend or invest that. That's my financial foundation. That's my 6 to 12 months of expenses saved. That's in there. So that money's just going to sit there. It's not going to do anything. So I might as well earn, 4.25% on it. Well, now that the Fed is dropping that, what's probably going to end up happening is Capital One, the company that I use, that it's with, is going to come in and they're going to drop that rate, because they're going to say, oh, okay, well, I can't loan as much anymore. We're all dropping rates now. So instead of you earning 4.25%, now you might only earn 3%. And so I'm not going to earn as much money on my interest now. So that's generally speaking the impact that the Fed has, that has a direct impact on all of us, the consumers, the everyday citizens of America. Now, there's a lot of other really complicated stuff that I can't explain to a 10-year-old. So if you want to know more, you can go read other articles and kind of dive into it. But hopefully that gives you, just a quick understanding of what's going on, how to prepare. Again, if they're doing this, it's like I always say, don't do what the rich people say. Do what the rich people do. Well, if you pay attention right now, the rich and powerful people that are in Washington that are making these policies, again, the only reason to cut rates is to stimulate the economy, which means the economy is not doing well. Well, they just came out and all the politicians that are currently in power are saying, oh, well, the economy's great. It's great that they did this. Everything's going really well. Well, that's stupidity. If everything was going really well, then you wouldn't have adjusted the rates. So it's total gaslighting from that perspective. It's just politicians being politicians trying to get reelected, right? They don't actually care about you that much. They just want to keep their jobs. So ignore what the elites and what all of them are saying and do what they are doing. So in contrast, if you look at CEOs, so I'm looking at like NVIDIA, one of the most valuable companies. They've skyrocketed. Their CEO is actively selling off lots of his shares. He's taking cash. A lot of other big CEOs of other big companies, what are they doing? They're selling their shares in their company. They are taking cash. What are a lot of investors doing? They're starting to take their cash. Why? Why are people pulling their money out of the market? Because normally, this is not 100% certain, okay? So this is not financial advice. Don't take it this way. I'm just going off of the trends. The trend is when you cut rates, what ends up happening is stocks start to plummet. You see a little bit of optimism, and then just a couple weeks when that's all done, boom, big tanks, okay? It's happened multiple different times. There's a lot of different reasons for it. I'm not going to get into it, but that's the reality. So for me and my household, we're heavy on cash right now because I do what the rich people do, okay? That's been my investing strategy. I don't do what they say because they're going to sit here and they're going to gaslight you and they're going to try to get their money out first before everybody else does. So when all the rich people start running to pull their money out the bank, guess what? I go when they go, not when they're like, oh, don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Okay. So if you want to follow that kind of strategy, then keep following along with me. Go to LinkedIn, check it out, sign up for the newsletter. I try to let everybody know. My goal is to help make all of us rich as much as possible so we can go out, live the life that we want and, live generously, give meaningfully, like all that fun stuff. Okay. But just know that even if you hate this stuff, even if you hate, paying attention to government and civics and the economy and like all these other things, I totally get it. But it's worth it just to get in there just a tiny bit. Okay. This is important stuff. It has a direct impact on you and the life that you want to live. So if you're listening to this and you're not the person who handles the finances, if you're like, dude, Steven, my wife handles the money, okay, that's fine. Just share this episode with her, let her listen to it, and then you guys come up with an investment strategy that makes sense for you and your family, okay? Anytime there's big moves in the market like this, we need to adjust. And for some people, they may say, hey, my goal is to just hold long-term through this stuff and let it rebound. That's great. Make sure you stick to it and then you don't panic sell if things drop. Because when emotions get involved, that's where people screw up. So if you want to hold through this thing and know that it'll rebound in a year or two, probably something like that, that's fine. That's a fine strategy. If you're somebody who's like, hey, I want to reduce my risk, maybe I'll sell some assets, whatever. Okay, do that too. The point is you need to be informed, you need to have a plan, and then you need to stick to it to the best that you can. Okay, that's really what I'm advocating for. So hopefully this was a good overview on the 50 basis points. If you see 50 bips, BPS, that's kind of what they're talking about there. So that's what they're talking about, that the Fed came out. They're going to take it. So that means if it was at 4, it's going to 3.5. So 50 turns into 0.5 percentage points. Okay, 100 is 1 percentage points. We go from 4, we go to 3, stuff like that. So that's all that they've announced for right now, that they're going to do 50. They might do more. We don't know yet. They normally meet every 3 months and then they talk about this and they give an announcement, kind of seeing how things going. So just pay attention to it and then adjust your strategy accordingly. and keep building wealth.